Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 4 of Masks Off. In episode 3, we were discussing how we created the masks that we have and where they came from. We talked a little bit about the ego and the inner child. In today's episode, we want to have a conversation with you about what are some of the results or outcomes of wearing these masks. What does it look like in your life when you wear these masks? I'm going to start again by sharing a quote, because we said we would share a quote to start off each of our episodes. This one is also from Lewis Howes, The Mask of Masculinity. And he says, "I don't think men are fundamentally flawed or broken." We can say women as well. Not at all. They are just trapped. I know that's the way I felt for 30 years of my life. Remembering the boxes that we stuffed our emotions in when we were younger, as we outgrew the boxes, they transformed into masks that hold us back and hurt our friends, family, career partners, and intimate lovers. So initially, we do create those masks when we're young because they are a protection for us. Then as we grow and become adults, those masks no longer serve us. However, we don't take them off and we don't get rid of the masks. We continue to wear them and we continue to be that 5-year-old, 7-year-old, 12-year-old, 14-year-old self still walking around in an adult body. But what happens is that as we wear the masks, we are disconnected from who we truly are. We dim our lights. We're no longer being authentic, that true self. And when we are not being our true selves, what can show up in your life as a way of knowing that you may be disconnected is you might feel depressed, anxious. If you find yourself numbing out on a ton of Netflix, drinking wine, lots of wine, lots of cookies, ice cream, scrolling through social media. If you are finding yourself unfulfilled in your relationships, your significant relationships with your partners or friends, if you feel like it's just on the surface and it's fake, it's not real, it's not authentic, you might feel, even though you have people around you, you may still feel very lonely. And often that can end in regret and resentment. And many people, in fact, will live their entire lives and go to their deathbed never being connected to their truest selves and never having those deep connections with others or a deep connection with oneself. So this is really why Tia and I want to do this project of creating Masks Off, is to help you and help ourselves become more connected, more connection to others, deep connection, real connection. And you can't have deep and real connection when you're wearing masks. And again, Tia had mentioned previously that it's not about taking them all off and throwing them away all in once. It's a process. So keeping in mind, it is a process.
And knowing that part of that process is the first step is even being aware that we're wearing them. You know, because like you said, there's people who take them to their deathbed. They may not even be aware. They are just one foot after another doing what they've been told, what they believe, without questioning, you know? So it's recognizing, am I wearing a mask? Am I connecting to my true self? Because connection starts first and foremost with us. You know, we can think we're connecting with another, but if we're not connecting to our authentic self in that connection, it's not true connection. And until you start to unravel and peel back those layers and those masks, we don't even realize it until you experience what real connection is. So until we have that contrast, and that involves pain because taking off these masks is not always pleasant. It's scary. It's being vulnerable. You may only be able to take off your mask with one person who's doing the work with you. You know, I think that's why when Kim and I really were able to connect offline, I mean, we've connected online for years, but when we connected offline, it was literally like we both took our masks, chucked them out the window, and it was like instant because we knew each other was doing the work. So we didn't even, I never questioned in our first phone call, well, even our first face-to-face visit and at Evolve, it was like, we just went, we dove off the deep end, and it was vulnerable from the very first moment because there was that trust factor that I know she's doing the work herself. And that's not a judgment of people who are not, don't get me wrong. Because now when I see people who I can tell haven't done the work, I just have compassion, but I don't feel pressure to have them take off the mask. So if you're listening right now, this is not, oh, you better do it, you know, or else your life's going to be awful or what. That's not what we're saying here. This is an invitation to explore when you're ready. And if you're not ready, that's okay too. We hope you keep listening because maybe, you know, the seeds will plant, and when you're ready to explore and you have that energy to do it, because it does take time and energy. We don't want to sugarcoat it that it's this magic, like she said, wave the magic wand and it just happens. It is a process, and the mask comes on and off depending who you're talking with. Because we do, just like in the Stephen Pressfield thing, the ego has a place. We do live in a world. Can we be 100% authentic in every situation we encounter? Not always. Because that's where that protective piece of that mask can come into play. That, oh, I'm going to put it on right now because I am standing in line and there's someone who is very aggressive with me, and it's not worth engaging and sharing that deepest part of me because they're not going to see it anyway. I can do it authentically in a way that's protective and meeting the person where they're at, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do agree with you. It is an invitation and it's a process. So, you know, it's progress, not perfection.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, even though you and I have had that instant connection with one another, there are people, you know, in my life who I still struggle to take off the mask. And, you know, and then other times it's that saying of how many times do you want to put your finger on the stove and get burned, right? So
yes.
I remember hearing a quote once, it's to love with a smart heart, right? So you have to be really conscious of how much you do expose yourself if you're going to keep getting burned. So I think that that's important as well, especially when starting out on the work. And then eventually, you know, you may get to a point where you're going to speak your truth no matter what to no matter who, because like that's the end goal, right? That's the end goal for me, is to be able to speak my truth in a loving way, in a conscious way to whoever, you know, wherever, no matter what. And that's the inspiration that I've been getting from reading Alicia Keys' book, because she just does talk about in her book how she is just shining her light. But here she is, she's famous, a celebrity, and she has had so many struggles with being her true self and taking off her mask. And she writes about that in her book. But I can feel it as I read in my core. I feel it in my gut that that's what my true self wants.
Right.
That's what that's why I feel like I'm here in this lifetime, right? If we ask the question, why are we here? Why are you here?
Right.
Yeah, why am I here?
Right.
And for me, I feel like I do have more than one purpose, but I feel like one of the big purposes is to become more and more authentic and just let my true self come forth. There's this ongoing war going on when my ego's there and I cover up and I go inward.
Yes.
There's this inner battle going on with the ego. No, I need to protect you. I need to protect you because I don't want you to get burned again.
Yep.
And then as I begin to grow and heal some of the old wounds, my true self is saying, no, shine your light.
Yep.
Don't worry about it. It's okay. It's cool. So it's this back and forth. So I
Mhm.
do feel like it's important to let listeners know that it is a process. It's not a one and done. And it's a
Right.
back and forth. It's an ebb and flow.
Mhm.
It's like one step forward. And then you might feel like, even like I
Scary.
was sharing about with the business, putting myself out there or putting this
Yeah.
whole podcast out there. We talked about that
Yeah.
offline, putting the podcast out there and letting people know. It's like, ooh, mask off. There
Totally.
might be some backlash that you and I might feel by exposing ourselves, but it's
Right.
okay. We're taking those steps.
Right. And it's that piece of vulnerability and sharing ourselves as we are, and recognizing we may listen to this in 5 years and be like, oh, I see that mask was showing up in that episode,
Yes.
because we don't know what we don't know. And that's
Yes.
why this whole invitation and noticing what happens when you're wearing your mask. Like you said, it's are you feeling depression? Are you resentful? Are you overeating? Are you over exercising? Because it can get extreme to
Yes.
either end. So those behaviors that may be showing up in your life. That's where you get curious. Why?
Yes.
What am I trying to avoid? And how could this look like a mask? And how could I potentially practice taking it off? Who could I practice taking it off with?
Yes.
And then knowing that when we take off that mask, like you had that inner battle. I mean, I totally relate. Like, oh, I know that place very, very well. And recognizing sometimes you take it off and you're just like, feel so good, but then the outside isn't embracing you in the
Yes.
way so you have to check your expectations in this whole process well. And so removing these masks, like with you and with other people in my life, it can be really easy because they're just accepting and meeting you as they are as
Yes.
well. But not everyone is going to be that way. So knowing sometimes you're going to be vulnerable and take it off and you're not going to get the response you're expecting. So notice that's another
Yes.
lesson.
It is.
It's another lesson. Instead of being like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I have to
Yes.
go back and be the scared child in my ego, and I got to put the mask back on with this person. Maybe it's an invitation to question, why was I so focused on that, on the other? If I was
Exactly.
shining my light and I was truly connected to myself and my own inner knowing, their reaction wouldn't have an influence on me. I mean, and that's a whole nother episode, first arrow,
Yes.
second arrow, all of that stuff, but too much to go
Absolutely.
into now. But it is a process, and just be gentle with
Yeah.
yourself.
I'll just share one example of how it's been showing up for me before we sign off on this episode.
Yeah.
Is that I've noticed in the last few weeks that I've been really moody about overeating, just overeating. So I'm like, and I know that when I'm overeating or eating when I'm not truly hungry, I know there's an underlying. So I do have that skill now of going inward and saying what is going on for me that I'm wanting to eat all the time. And what I've come up with, because there's a lot of good going on. I'm building a business, I'm building a website, I'm doing a podcast, I'm doing a lot of things, but I'm pushing myself every day, all day long, to do tasks and this and that, and then motherly duties and wife duties, and to try to be so super competent that I can handle it all and do it all. And I'm noticing how much of a human doing I am. I'm being a human doing, not a human being.
Yep.
So that whole revved upness of being a human doing instead of a human being has created anxiety for me. And then what do I want to do with that anxiety? I want to push the anxiety down. Well, how can I push that back down? Food, eat,
Yep.
eat,
Yep.
push it down. So I was able to recognize that yesterday, and I said, you know what? I'm going to and I was tired. So I just said, I'm going to chill out. And I just tried to allow myself to just be for a little while and just to recharge. We have to recharge ourselves and refuel. So that was just a real good eye-opening for me of noticing the behavior.
Right.
What's the mask? I'm being a human doing. I have to be, again, perfect. super competent.
Right.
Right? I can get everything done. And then it was actually also about my best is good enough. and just letting it go, leaving some of the tasks that I didn't do, left them there.
Right. Right. I mean, and even just
Being okay
something,
with it.
the simpleness, and it's not simple, but being okay with it not being perfect. I mean, we coming into this podcast right away, we're like, you know what? If the video freezes or the audio freezes, we're just going to leave it. We're not going to over edit. I mean, we've made a commitment to each other and to our listeners. We are
and
not,
how what we wear, right? We're not coming all dressed up in like hair done, no jewelry. And if we do, it's because we feel like we want to.
Exactly.
Not because we're putting a mask on for the audience.
Right. It's because we're doing it for ourselves. So any glitches or any fumbles, we're leaving them for you because we want to be vulnerable for you and release that perfectionism and that human doing and everything you just talked about, because it's really easy to fall back into that.
Absolutely.
That's a
so
great
we hope
story.
You enjoyed. Thank you. And we hope you enjoyed today's episode of talking about the results and outcomes of the masks that we wear. So stay tuned for episode 5.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.